asked David Shaler about MI5 and MI6 connections to al-Qa'ida.
I learned of an operation in which MI6, the British External Intelligence Service, had funded al-Qa'ida to carry out an operation to try and assassinate Colonel Gaddafi of Libya. And once I'd become briefed on a plot in which MI6 was funding our terrorist enemies without government permission, I no longer wanted to be part of that setup.
We also spoke with former MI5 agent Annie Machon, herself a whistleblower, exposing MI5 and MI6 wrongdoing.
I went public in conjunction with my partner because we'd seen so many dreadful things going on, and we believe that the British public deserves better protection.
My own, not as much government but intelligence services, were carrying out operations in which innocent Libyans died.
David was briefed officially by MI6 officers on their attempt to assassinate Colonel Gaddafi by funding al-Qa'ida in Libya.
So I felt the need to say something about that. It took a long time to have the courage to be able to do that with the newspapers in this country, but eventually I decided that was the only way forward.
We had to leave our friends and family, we had to leave our jobs, our home, everything in London with 3 days' notice because the newspapers suddenly decided to kick into action.
I lived in exile for 3 years. In fact, when I actually tried to use a legal route to alert the British government about MI6 funding al-Qa'ida, I was the one thrown in prison.
We then tried to negotiate with the government. We tried to say, please take our evidence about the crimes we've seen. The government refused then, and to this day, 8 years on, they are still refusing to take David's evidence and my evidence about crimes committed by our intelligence agencies.
We have sources have told the press, sources in America from the State Department and the CIA have confirmed that payments were made to a group in Libya that was associated with Osama Bin Laden. A document actually appeared on the internet which predates the attack and describes exactly the modus operandi, the way of carrying out the attack, the timing of the attack, the people involved, the Islamic extremists and so on, that I described when I went on the record. As a result of the attacks on 7/7, the British people seem much more complacent and will allow the state to infringe their liberties in a way that they wouldn't allow them to do otherwise.
While in London, I learned that Parliament had just passed a law that would ban any type of free speech within several miles around the British Parliament building.
Blair's approval ratings go up when there is an event. Bush's approval ratings go up when there is an event. What, quote, Muslim extremists in their right mind would carry out an operation that would empower the New World Order global empire whose epicenter is London and New York and D.C.? Why would anybody put up with this? My friends, never give up your liberty. Stand up against tyranny. Learn the truth and find out who has the motive. Find out who has the motive to scare you into submission, to intimidate you, to bully you, into accepting their wars of global wars and empire and genocide.
At a time like this, I think people are prepared to give up a little bit of their liberty, aren't they? Just a bit. I mean, you know, it's okay. I mean, if you've got nothing to hide, it's not really a problem, is it?
I think we should be just a bit firmer on what we've allowed here. I think we've been too democratic and we've been too soft.
What it's done to people who wish to demonstrate is increasingly worrying. A lot of demonstrations, both at Genoa, at the G8 at Gleneagles, many other places around the world, there is no wish of those who demonstrate, in my view, for violence. They disagree profoundly with what their governments are doing. I'm not saying whether they're right or wrong. I'm simply saying that they should have the right to do so without harassment, intimidation, or indeed being charged, attacked, and being seriously injured.
Because the only ones who are going to be allowed to have the big loudspeakers out in the public areas, just like in China, are going to be the state.
I must say one of the things that does concern me is Brian Hoare, who camped outside Parliament in the square, which actually faces the parliamentary buildings, faces the large iron gates where ministers come in and MPs go in and out. It may be ignored, he may be laughed at, he may be mocked, but at least he is able to do it, and some people may listen, and you may have more effect than we realise. Now, we call that, or at least we used to call that, free speech.
What about the Freedom Lady? the Statue of Liberty. Well, I did hear a rumor that the Statue of Liberty has been brought in for questioning. She may be with al-Qa'ida. You're probably right.
6 times they've taken me to court. Oh no, we took them to court this time, by the way. We took Mr. Charles Clark, the Home Secretary, and Mr. Ian Blair, the Commissioner of Police. I was the complainant, they were the defendants. And it was found in my favour.
It is very much of concern that we've actually got an Act of Parliament which in one of its sections is clearly designed to prevent him or people like him putting across a message which they feel passionately about and which could be heard within the confines of Parliament. I find that very worrying.
I bullhorned Parliament 3 days before the law went into effect.
George Bush carried out 9/11. Do you think some people in a cave were able to have NORAD stand down? Do you think that people in a cave were able to have all of this happen? It's a total and complete fraud. The New World Order is using terror to scare you into submission, and they will be defeated. And here in this supposed free country where they're trying to pass a law to stop this, they're here to talk to us.
I witnessed local activists bullhorning Parliament, and the local police didn't have a problem with that. But as soon as I got on the bullhorn and began talking about pertinent issues, they became very upset and enrolled me into some type of troublemaker database.
You've got to understand that governments stand to gain from terror, to scare you into submission, to attack. Dick Cheney, in September of 2000, openly wrote a document called Rebuilding America's Defenses. And he said, we need a Pearl Harbor event. The U.S. government wants to carry out terror attacks to blame it on their enemies. 9/11 was a self-inflicted wound. 9/11 was an inside job. It was orchestrated. It was engineered by the globalists.
A few weeks after returning to the United States, I then read in the newspapers in horror that I had indeed been enrolled in a terrorist database.
The identity cards, the compulsory identity cards that have been proposed for the first time in our history, around about 80% of the British people oppose the introduction of these cards. And it's not just cards, it's the databases that go behind that allows the state to access private information and so on. And yet as a result of 7/7, it seems that these things will be steamrolled through our Parliament. Wherever we look at the moment, there are assaults on civil liberties, as a result, of course, of the so-called war on terror.
Similar guidelines have been implemented inside the United States. A Virginia anti-terror training manual lists property rights activists as potential terrorists. A Texas manual lists those wearing Levi's jeans, having cell phones, and who are, quote, friendly towards the police as potential terrorists. In Arizona, they list those that make frequent references to the U.S. Constitution as potential terrorists. All of these guidelines have been produced by the federal government and distributed at the state level. The federal government itself has told police to be on the lookout for drivers who have road almanacs or driver atlases. All across the planet, governments are restricting free speech and setting up so-called free speech zones to stop their populations from demonstrating.